Welcome to a very exciting episode 3 of Between the Generations. Today we are lucky enough to be joined by another parent-child duo in the form of father and son, Jeff and Adam Brighty. If you guys would like to introduce yourselves, Jeff first.
Thanks, Em. I'm Jeff Brighty. I'm head of sustainability at a advanced recycling company called Mura Technology. And I'm also looking after R&D for the company as well.
Great. And Adam?
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me. As you said, my name is Adam Brighty. I'm currently a PhD student at Imperial College London, and I look at the links between air quality and climate mitigation strategies. I previously have also worked for Plastic Oceans and done a sort of a summer internship there.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. This episode's going to be fairly fluid, focused on passions and what drives us career-wise, but we will also be looking at the topic of microplastics, as it's something that, for all of us, threads through our work life and we see and hear about often. It's a problem that affects us all and an important one to tackle. For me, choosing to base my life around proximity to the sea, I see firsthand the effect of plastics on the ocean and the seasonality of this. But I think the greater issue lies in the unseen, both in the water we swim in and the air we breathe. But more on that later. Let's get started with the first question. Jeff, we first met when I interviewed you for my dissertation project on invasive species, and you've had a long career in the environmental sector. But what have been the major environmental issues you've come into contact with during your career, and has microplastics been one of them?
So microplastics absolutely has been one, and I share your passion for the marine environment. In fact, that was where I started. My first degree was marine biology and zoology at Bangor in what seems a very long time ago, effectively sort of 1981 to 84. So we're talking 40 years ago. And it was interesting at the time, even then marine pollution issues were coming to the fore. There was a lot of focus on things like tributyl tin and anti-fouling paints and what that was doing to invertebrate populations in particular. And the research was going on at Bangor at the time on things like that. But I've been very fortunate to have joined organisations that have given me a real chance to learn and develop. So I started actually after marine science doing fish farming. And I spent a few years doing that, but then went into research and development and had a really varied career in the National Rivers Authority and then the Environment Agency, which encompassed a whole range of issues. So the good thing about research is that you're at the forefront of big questions. The one, I suppose, got me really going was something called endocrine disruption and looking at why fish were changing sex in rivers, largely down to the human population excreting things like natural and synthetic hormones. So that was a big topical issue, lots in the media, just like the plastics thing. But also interesting, and this is where I think I met Andy for the first time properly, was around something called the killer shrimp, which became very topical for a period of time as we had our first discovery of that shrimp in Bratton Water, and Andy working at Angling Water obviously still. So we first met and discussed that. So I guess to sort of summarise, you don't know it's going to be a big issue until something really sort of hits the media, probably, some of those things. And plastics absolutely hit the media in recent years, and I had a lot of fun involved with plastics, partly in Environment Agency, but mostly since I left in 2014.
I think that's definitely why plastics is something that's on everyone's lips, is just because it's such a big one in the media. And even if you're not really in the sector or know that much about the environment, you know about plastics, and especially in the ocean. So yeah, really interesting. Adam, your dad, just like mine's been in this game for a fairly long time. And with you currently doing your PhD, why have you chosen this sort of area as your one of study and the career path that you're looking to follow?
Yeah, it's a very good question. God, honestly, I think some of my earliest memories are of my if there was any kind of flood or like tidal surge going on. I just remember my dad being on TV, and it was just one of those moments. Not I'm saying that was the reason why I decided to follow this career path at all, but it was definitely an indication that a lot of what my dad did was very tangible there were some real, roots-based impacts from what he did and from the work in which the environmental sector does effectively. So my background was actually traditional chemistry, doing a lot of sort of organic reactions and that kind of thing in labs, and it's interesting, but it gets to a point where you don't, you're getting a 5% extra yield, like that I'm sure that means something to someone, and it's definitely important work, but for me I couldn't really see the long-term tangible impacts of that. And I think doing something like environmentalism and policy, in a way, you see a lot more of the decisions you make and the impacts it can have on a whole general population, as opposed to just someone that may use a typical chemical reaction that you've come up with. I think it's an area where you really do see the impacts more of what your passions and your desires than in other areas, I'd say.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think in every job interview I've done, I just say I want to see that impact and know that what I'm doing has a tangible effect. Really, to both of you, this question, what are the biggest challenges you think we face in tackling the sort of microplastics and plastics in general issue? Does it lie in legislation, innovation, investment, or anything really?
I'll let you start, Jeff, on that one.
I think the first thing really has been getting governments engaged in this issue in general, of which microplastics is an important one, because it's amongst the hardest things to address. But I think the general view of plastics is that these things were disposable, you just chuck them away. We've always told that. I mean, I can remember as a child, younger than Adam, I guess, and there were toys that were, and the quote was "made in Hong Kong," and maybe that meant it was plastic, and it probably wasn't going to be very durable. And I think that whole sort of mindset has stuck with a lot of people, to the point where consumption of plastic has got to a place where it overwhelms the waste systems such as they exist in countries around the world. And I think the challenge essentially has been the wake-up call from the environmental impact has been part of this. But I think also the second point is, actually, this is a really valuable resource, but we don't value it. And that's made the point about it being thrown away. Because we don't value it, we don't then see the impact on the environment when it is thrown away or disposed of or burnt or whatever. So I think for me, governance is key. Public support and interest, getting people really angry about an issue is really important here, because then it will drive the legislation, it will drive the regulation then of companies in this space, and also innovation and research. And I've been very fortunate. I didn't really do a great deal of work on plastics when I was in the Environment Agency. It's been since I've become more freelance. But I've really enjoyed the innovation and creativity around this wicked problem that was really hard to solve. And I think for me, it's been the most satisfying things to be a part of, because you, as Adam was saying, you start to think about, well, how can I effect change? And you do that. Good communication is really kind of where I came in on with the kind of Plastic Ocean, working for Plastic Oceans, the charity in the UK. So communicating the issue and getting people energized about it, and then we're now seeing the follow-on to improve technologies that are going to solve the problem. But then it's about how quickly can we solve it, and how we can accelerate and get to scale. That's the biggest challenge I think we find. I think there's just very quickly on microplastics. We know, it's interesting that Adam did chemistry. I mean, as a biologist, spent most of my time trying to stop chemistry in the cells. It's interesting, Adam walked away from that laboratory and industrial chemistry piece. I think that's really interesting to see. Actually, I've got a skill set, knowledge that could be really useful for the environmental sector. But we know a lot about exposure to a lot of chemicals and so on, and including microplastics. We don't really know the harmful effects and over what time period. So there's a lot of knowledge we still don't have, because these things have not been around that long. And so disease, health, and all those other issues will be some time before we fully understand. So we have to be cautious, be precautionate about these. To you, Adam?
Yes. I don't think you can look anything beyond legislation for these sort of large scale issues. When it comes to plastics, plastic is an incredible material. It's it can be hard, it can be soft, it can be malleable. Put it in any shape you like. But I really think that when it comes to the use of plastic, the fact that we've not found a way as a world to encourage the for the market to encourage the use of recycled plastic instead of virgin plastic, for example, is a massive thing. I don't think you can look much beyond that as an issue. And I think as well, as my dad may have said about things from Hong Kong and China back in the day being a byword for something that's probably plasticky and not the best quality. Predominantly that's down to the fact that as a country and as a sort of Western Hemisphere, we outsource a lot of that stuff to those parts of the world. So it's not, it's a difficult one because it's an incredibly useful material, but I don't think it's I think without any sort of strong governance, I don't think we're going to be able to get anywhere with it. When it comes to microplastics, it's an incredibly new area. For the first time in this year's UNECE Convention on long-range transboundary air pollution, it's the first time they brought up microplastics. They've actually been using mosses and lichens to be able to detect for atmospheric concentrations of microplastics, because there's not really another way of doing it. So we're talking about something that's incredibly new, and especially with microplastics, I don't think we're going to be able to have a sort of legislative approach until we fully understand the extent to which it's prevalent. Now it seems to be pretty much everywhere, but we've not got especially in the air pollution industry, a day-to-day way of effectively measuring these kind of things. So yeah, I think it's a legislation problem. I think until you get strong governance that's pushing to understand these sort of things, I don't think you're going to get a private sector that's going to push to do that. But yeah, I think those are sort of my opinions on it.
So thanks, Adam. Thanks, Jeff. It's really interesting, really fascinating, and particularly what you're saying there, Adam, about kind of focus being on legislation. And Jeff, I think I can see in the background, is that a picture of David Attenborough up on your shelf?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was really interesting for me the sudden elevation of plastics as an issue when David Attenborough started talking about it. And we know there's a David Attenborough effect. They used to talk about Delia Smith, didn't they, from a cooking program, that when she did a new recipe, it would suddenly disappear off the shelves. Well, David Attenborough is the kind of equivalent from a more important kind of nature conservation perspective. So I guess a kind of a question around what does success then look like? If we zoom ahead 30, 50 years, what are going to be the solutions, and what does good look like in terms of the environment and plastics and microplastics particularly? And I guess a question to think about, Adam, is also what role do we as individuals, as consumers, play? If the legislation gets things right, is there still a need for us as individuals to take responsibility and to behave in a way that enables the system to work properly?
Yes, of course, you're absolutely right. That there is always a part for the individual to play. I don't think personally, I don't think it's healthy to think of this in a solely individualistic sense. I think that's a tactic that can be very much used to alienate people from thinking, what's the point? I think it's a massively used tactic within sort of big industry to make sure that you feel that you've got your responsibility to do it when every single person is effectively a drop in the ocean. Now, a collective action is a very different kind of thing. I think, you know, I have people that I know that work within sort of the waste industry when it comes to solid recycling and sort of plastics, and I think there is a real lack of education around it, especially when it comes to food grade plastics and how much they can contaminate a waste stream. I think that's definitely a massively important thing. I don't think the emphasis should be put completely on the consumer to do it, because again, I do think it's predominantly a legislation issue. But yeah, I think to have some sort of strong governance, like we've seen, you know, the early days of this Labour government so far. Ed Miliband within the first 72 hours has lifted the ban on offshore wind and made them nationally significant infrastructure projects. That's the sort of strong leadership that, you know, as you say, probably the private sector would need as much as consumers would need to see that, you know, this is the direction we're going. And that's the sort of leadership we need. You know, I think it's a very different issue. I think for me, it might be slightly different to some other people, but I think when it comes to success in this issue, I think you know, a nationalized water program wouldn't be a bad thing, especially with the amount of which our sort of wastewater streams are being polluted by companies left, right, and centre, from Thames Water especially, because I'm in London, I see it all the time, and yet my bill keeps going up. And I think this is the sort of thing that for me would be success. I don't think it's yeah, I'm sure there'll be other ways and there'll be other opinions here, but yeah, I think for me that's the sort of that's what I see as success is, you know, the same sort of stand that we've taken on onshore wind, and you know, that was for 9 years that ban's been in place, and how much it's impacted our energy bills from that time. I'd love to see a very similar thing for national water like they have in Scotland, and even if it's not for profit like in Wales, or even in the sense of, you know, national rail as well. So yeah, for me, I think success sort of come down that sort of route of strong governance and a sort of central leadership, really.
Right, yeah, and please, I wasn't suggesting that we point the finger of blame away from governance towards individual action.
No, of course not. No,
absolutely. It's as much the role, the positive role that people have in being able to make change, not just their own individual changes, but to change the system as well. So, you know, it's fantastic to see when communities, you know, come together and decide that something is wrong and needs to change. So yeah. And Jeff, what are your thoughts on that?
So success, I guess the first thing I would say is I'd like to see a halt to the decline in nature. I find it baffling that this country is so nature depleted compared to other places. To ask the question, well, why is that? What have we done in the UK that's driven that? And I was very fortunate. I have met Sir David, and I mentioned to him, I said, what inspired me to get into nature and this sector was a program called The World About Us. You're probably a bit too young, Andy, to remember this, but it was early 70s. It was a Sunday night 1 hour program. And he just said, well, that was one of my programs. He was controlling BBC Two at the time. And he said, I wanted to have a 1 hour nature program where everything was a half-hour format. If it wasn't for that program, I may not have gone into things like fishing and getting cycling in the countryside of Norfolk where I was fortunate to grow up. So when government set a target in 2019 that by 2042 we would have addressed a whole range of nature issues as well as plastics and so on, that felt a very long time away. So I'm always looking for strong leadership to accelerate towards these goals. I think we haven't got the luxury of time. And in my lifetime, in effect, I've failed. I've presided in my professional life in the environmental sector and see it get worse. So I guess the question for me is, let's have some really ambitious targets and let's look at the systems that have got us this far. I've worked, I had to mention about flooding. I've worked in flood risk a little bit since I left the Environment Agency. And I did a lecture for some students, and it was really the history of flooding in one sense, but how the history of flooding was so much influenced by land use change and the government of the day's Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Foods, as it used to be called, or part of DEFRA, how that influenced change in land management for production for good reasons post-war particularly, and then what that led to in terms of the state of the impacts on our water system. Obviously, then bringing things like pesticides and so on for agricultural use. So when I look at systems collide, then you've got a water industry then colliding with agriculture, and that's not a happy place to be. We've got to find ways to change a lot of that. So for success, I think it is partly regulation. I think it is partly about sector leadership, government leadership, certain policy, to then set the frame for this is an ambitious target we want to get to. It's important we achieve it. I think that will be my first goal, and it would honour, I guess, as I come to the end of my career, where I started. At least I'd like the environment to be no worse than when I started, which is not where it is at the moment. And I think just secondly on success, I think the public consciousness, and it's interesting listening to Adam talk, and obviously yourself, Ellen, in terms of your career journey. I think you're much more aware of environmental issues because we've had a loss of things over the last few years and seen impacts. In my time, it was oil spills, big tankers were hitting rocks and things like that. It felt quite remote in some cases. Yes, massive impacts, but then they went away. And actually, how much damage did they ultimately leave? Now, the impacts are all around us to see. They're everywhere, and we weren't seeing many bees in our gardens a few months ago. So, for me, I think your awareness is far greater than mine ever was in terms of the challenge ahead. And I just hope that brings your generation energy to try and solve some of the problems that we've created, in effect, by it could be putting more food on the table as an affordable price, but actually to the other price aspects of cost then get really counted for.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And we were both inspired by the same person then. So it was Life on Earth for me, which was the following series that David Attenborough made, which really absolutely cemented in my mind as a young boy what I wanted to do in my career. And I feel absolutely the same way, in that we've made made some inroads in certain areas from an environmental perspective, and then we've uncovered a whole host of other things, and we are on balance behind where we were, and we've got to turn that around. So we've got to pass on that inspiration to the next generation and work with them to supercharge how we make a difference and really make some tangible impact. Back to you.
Yeah, I mean, our podcast is called Between the Generations, so I have to drop in a sort of question to link with that. I mean, how do you guys think we can work more effectively sort of across the generations, spanning everyone in the workforce? And I mean, even beyond, do you think it is an educational sort of thing we can tackle for people coming into the sector to increase our impact and reach those targets?
I think, which is great, because I think we should be questioned by this new generation that's basically going to pick up the pace and try and solve some of the problems that exist now. I think the first thing I'll say is to not be too downcast about it. We spotted it, we know there's something going wrong, and we know how we can fix it more often than not. It then becomes down to economics or opportunities to create new habitats or whatever. Not in technology is, we can't invest too much time on thinking, we'll be saved by a piece of technology. It's not just like that. We've got to think about this thing called climate change, for example. So, technology will help us in that, but it won't be the only thing that we need to help solve the problem. I think there's a huge need for improved education, and I think we're talking about GCSE level and before. So I spent time in all my son's schools, back, including Adam's primary junior school, doing work on things like climate change, and it was so easy. The children had no preconceptions, they just enjoyed this storytelling and realised they had to do something about it. And these are the tangible things, often involving going home and telling your parents to put the right material in the right bin, turn the lights off, go to energy saving bulbs, whatever it might have been. So we were trying to basically energise these little foot soldiers to go and be those change agents. I think the education that has to continue, and I think we have to make sure that we're equipping people to have green skills in general, not just for the few that end up working in the environmental sector. So it's partly awareness and partly then making the right decisions in their lives, whether it's to use public transport rather than drive a car, things like that. You say you can make a difference and you'll save money. And I would say the other thing is that having equipped people to be aware is giving them opportunities to, as you've both done, volunteering. I think volunteering is a great thing. It gives you so much awareness of different workplaces and their cultures. And it's an opportunity, I think, then to give something back and demonstrate as a good citizen that you're prepared to do something, for little reward except your own personal development. So I think our generation needs to create those opportunities so that we can upskill and enthuse and bring that passion from our side into yourselves. You guys are both into that, but I know there are kids now who don't see this as a job for them or a sector to work in, and I think that's a shame, because we do need bright, capable people to be involved with this sector, because actually what we need delivering is the future of our society, the future of wildlife and nature in this country. We have to get that passion and drive and opportunity across more readily than we currently do, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything my dad said there is perfectly valid. I think about working more effectively, I think it's very difficult. I think for a lot of young people, there's a lot of sort of environmental and climate angst. I know there's a lot of, not so much in the case of my dad, but I know from other parents and other families, there's a lot of sort of, not denial, but lack of acceptance around the generation, that they probably had it quite good and didn't really know that they probably could have done things a lot quicker. ExxonMobil have known about these kind of things for a lot of time now. I don't know anyone that was in it, that I don't know have any family members or any family friends that are part of ExxonMobil, so I can't chastise them directly. But yeah, I think the first thing for generations to work on these sort of issues effectively is to probably accept that we're as a society probably quite late to the party on this issue. I think that's a massive thing, and also for parents and older generations, if it's in a workforce, to be able to accept that potentially young people have got slightly fresher ideas, or that they can learn something from younger people. I think my parents raised relatively 3 headstrong boys, and I think a lot of their opinions and everything in today have been shaped by us. At least I'd hope to think so. I think that's a massively important thing, to be able to accept that obviously someone that comes into the workforce at 25, 26 isn't going to know everything, and nor should they, but people in their slightly later into their career should be able to accept that that there will be some good opinions and some ideas coming from this generation coming into the workforce, and a potential acceptance that probably we should have started doing a lot of these things a little bit earlier. Now that's not the case for everyone, but you see quite a few of the people that protest for Just Stop Oil. They're vicars, retirees, people that do feel that sort of level of guilt around these kind of things, and that's the sort of thing that I find incredibly heartwarming and very inspiring. I think that's probably the easiest way to sort of bridge that gap, if I'm being completely honest. Yeah.
Brilliant answers in there. I think we're coming towards the end of time, so I'm just gonna kind of, I don't know, make one comment, and then perhaps you want to summarize things up. And what's really hit me there from listening, particularly to you, Adam, is how do we get those voices heard more clearly and effectively, whether that's within companies or whether that's within people making the legislation. And I look at some of the changes that have been made. If you look at Patagonia and the way that they have changed their business model, and they have said Earth is their only stakeholder, there are other companies that are doing the same. How do we raise that level of community and environmental representation at the highest level in organizations, but more, to your point on legislation, probably more importantly, in the way the decisions are made within government and within agencies which have got devolved powers. So not asking for an answer on that, I think that's a really, really interesting takeaway.
No, I mean, yeah, No, you're absolutely right. I think first, education around this issue is massively important. I think there are some very structural issues with the way that we do economics across the world, especially in the sort of capitalist sort of world where everything's treated as a household budget, and any sort of austerity package is never going to work. The sort of things that we need are large-scale infrastructure projects that provide growth and provide investment into your society. I think they're massively important. When it comes to sort of galvanizing people, education is of course a massively important thing in this issue. But I always come back to, I think it's a Matt cartoon, or it might be something like that, where it's the end of the world and there's a man in a suit saying, but for a short time we created significant value for our shareholders. And growth is great whilst you can have it, but it's you can't have infinite growth in a finite world, and we need to start changing our metrics. I think when it comes to what you define as a flourishing society, GDP can't be your only measure. You can talk about education levels, obesity rates, the amount of children in poverty, and sort of trying to measure things in a way that aren't just based on infinitely trying to grow. I think that's probably the best way of doing things. You can only really get people engaging in these sort of issues when the fundamental issues of their lives aren't being pressed upon, be it heating or eating effectively. So it's not an easy question. I think that's probably my answer if it answered any of it at all. But I'll pass on to my dad if he's got any other sort of thoughts.
Again, Adam and I have never had this conversation before, so you've actually fermented an interesting mind share between us both. I picked up one particular thing which I think is really interesting, is you're calling out things that have been fairly fixtures in my working life. So you discussed a water company or two and so on. That shaped my entire career, because I was with an organisation called Anglian Water in the late 80s. I was only there 18 months, and then I became member of the National Resources Authority. The regulatory arm went off. So the structures for utilities and providers for the civil society have been there for 30 plus years. And it's right to call them out if they're not working in the way that we feel they should, from where we are today moving forward. So I think I sense that sort of anger, and I think anger is misplaced. It's not great, as we've just seen recently, but anger in the right way to drive change is really important. I'm heartened by the recent elections. I won't get into the political issues around the outcome, but particularly to find 5 Green MPs giving voice now to green issues almost exclusively. I think that's a really interesting sign. The fact that the first past the post system has delivered 5 Green MPs the first time it's ever happened. And also one MP, I think 21, and I believe it was a constituency I used to live in. Now, that might have been, I would say, a fluke, but it might have been an unexpected result. But isn't it great to have younger voices in Parliament that are bringing light to these things? So I'm heartened that the demographic of parliamentarians is changing, and changing with political persuasion, but also an age demographic. And maybe we'll start to see the impact of that over the next coming 2 or 3 years. It will then shape future policy. I'm sure Labour has some great environmental policies to come forward, but the Greens might be making it even sharper, in which case, let's see where that can go. So from elected representatives piece, I think that's a really interesting change. And I would hope that both you, Adam, and Emily would feel as though you're seeing people in Parliament who look like you from all those aspects. And I think that's really important. Really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the recent election, it was the first time I could vote, and seeing even the small changes that have come out of it quickly, especially, seeing those Green MPs elected, it gave me a little bit of hope, and hopefully it will just keep rolling that way. I mean, thank you guys so much for joining. I've learned so much even on this podcast. I think having studied geography, which is such a broad subject, you hear a lot about a lot of little things, but not necessarily in the detail. So really, really interesting discussions. And I think definitely taking away, like Jeff, what you said about nurturing young green sort of lives, and that most kids come out when they're young and they have that passion and it's very simple to them what needs to be done and things like that. So nurturing that, bringing a bit of wild back to the country, and yeah, focusing on education, definitely.
Just to respond to that, a recent case study, for example, for me was that so I'm involved with Norfolk Rivers Trust. We took on a volunteer, and she had done a degree at the University of Cambridge, and she'd done it in economics. But at no point in her course was environmental economics even mentioned, let alone taught. There was no module. So she came out basically not having any understanding of environmental economics and nature-based solutions and ecosystem services and how they can be valued and I suppose used to demonstrate the impact of something on the environment. And she spent 3 months with us as a volunteer, and it's completely changed her view of how economics can make a difference. We need a lot of different skill sets coming into the environmental sector. They shouldn't all be just geographers or marine scientists or chemists. We need a whole raft of different skill sets, legal, HR, finance, because they make the organizations then actually work. But you can still go to work with a purpose because you're working for an organizational purpose. I'm sure, Andy, you see that in your organization. So yes, green skills is hugely important, but you can also be working for a company that's got great values, for sure.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. My genuine belief is that everybody in every organization has got to be driving sustainability, because that's the only way we all thrive and we all survive. So I think it's everybody's responsibility. But it's been a fascinating discussion. Yeah, can't thank you enough, Jeff and Adam, for joining Emily and I. And we hope listeners, we hope you enjoy it and have got something out of it too. So until next time, thank you very much. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Jeff. And thanks ever so much as ever. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you very much.